Welcome to the Philippines Study Abroad Orientation. This is just a definition for culture that comes from Madeline Leininger. The learned, shared, and transmitted knowledge of values, beliefs, norms, and life ways of a particular group that guides an individual or group in their thinking, decisions, and actions in patterned ways. A concern that I have for anyone when they're studying abroad is the tendency for ethnocentrism, which is the universal tendency of human beings to think that their ways of thinking, acting, and believing are the only right, proper, and natural ways. Another way of explaining ethnocentrism is the belief that one's own cultural values and beliefs are the dominant view, the correct view, or the superior view. Another challenge when you study abroad or you go into another society is what we refer to as stereotypes, which is an oversimplified conception, opinion, or belief about some aspect of an individual or group of people. Very often, our understanding of stereotypes is a generalization to all members of a group, normative or imagined characteristics. When you go to the Philippines, unless you've been there before, very likely you will encounter some form of culture shock. This is an example from one of our students in the past. Throughout this adventure, my life flashed before my eyes numerous times as the taxi swerved and jerked. New York driving is calm compared to this. The dotted lines, where you can actually see them, are completely ignored, sometimes coming centimeters away from other cars or people. I was appalled. The traffic is literally bumper to bumper at all times, and we never exceeded 20 miles per hour. I closed my eyes as cars neared us, hoped for the best. A second entry from a student's journal that relates to culture shock. Another thing that scared me at the beginning of the week was the hospital tour. I have never been in a hospital outside of the USA, and I didn't know what to expect. The condition of the hospital really bothered me at first. I wasn't prepared to see non-modernized setting. I also wasn't prepared to see family members sleeping in the halls on cardboard, or prepared to see two patients sharing a twin-sized hospital bed. It was also strange to see the lack of equipment as compared to the United States. And this is a third example of culture shock. Our first clinical day in pediatrics was very hard emotionally. We were exposed to new diseases and conditions. Children lay on rusted beds with nothing between them and the springs but a thin piece of cardboard or blanket. I felt useless. I couldn't comfort them with clean sheets, food, etc. that we offer in our hospitals. My 15-year-old patient wasn't compliant with my questioning, but Mom was helpful. It is so hard to watch children suffer from treatable diseases. Amy's patient remains clear in my mind, his wasted body clinging to his parents and crying in pain. To me, there was no excuse for his pain. We were all sad and even somewhat angry by the conditions we witnessed. And so you can see from these three journal entries that students experience something beyond their imagination when they travel into the Philippines. When you engage a second culture or society, there is a range of cultural adjustments that a person makes. They range from ethnocentrism to ethnorelativism, and communications specialist named Murray came up with these 6 stages: denial, defense, minimization, acceptance, adaptation, integration. Before I go through these, I want to emphasize that each one of us will, at different times, be in different stages. I still find myself sometimes in denial or defense. Sometimes I feel in adaptation. So these are not developmental levels that you achieve as a milestone, like potty training or something like that. The first stage, denial. The person has a lack of knowledge and the belief that there are no inherent differences between cultures. I am unable to see the other culture's perspective when I am in denial. Defense. The person has a culture shock, feelings of resentment or anger towards the new culture, blaming the new culture for problems experienced. Statements begin with things like, "It bothers," or "I'm concerned," or "It angers me." Statements about one's own culture does something better. An example, which I think came from earlier, "It is so hard to watch children suffer from treatable diseases. One patient remains clear in my mind, his wasted body clinging to his parents and crying for pain. To me there was no excuse for his pain. We were all sad and even somewhat angry by the conditions we witnessed." In defense, the person is experiencing a strong protectiveness about one's own cultural system and a very resistance to the other culture. Reverse defense is almost an opposite, but it is still in that very early stages of cultural adaptation. Reverse defense is believing that the new culture has better values and is more caring. One would say one's own culture is selfish or inferior in comparison to the new culture being experienced. An example, "I think the working environment there," and this is in reference to the Philippines, "is so much better than U.S. because doctors and nurses treat each other as equals. And that is so important to give patients better all-around care. They don't have tons of high and mighty doctors running around ordering everybody around." You can see the disdain for American healthcare environment in this statement. Minimization. With minimization, the person encountering the new culture does recognize that there are two cultures present, but basically minimizes the significance of each culture. Insists that both cultures share common beliefs, values, and attitudes, and there's a failure to recognize the differences. This is different from denial in that in denial there is no awareness of the other culture. An example, "Even though they didn't always understand what I was saying and vice versa, we really seemed to connect on a deeper level. This connection was proven through eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures. A simple thank you with the squeezing of your hand after the delivery proved that nursing has no language barriers and care can be expressed in any language." And if you ever work cross-lingually with another population, there is no assumption that even nonverbal communication is identical between two different cultures. Acceptance. This is an acknowledgement that things may be done differently, but it is still acceptable. In other words, the person recognizes the differences now in the cultures, but does not have a judgment cast towards either of the two cultures. An example, "I always believed that their relaxed attitudes and their concern for others plays a large part in their concept of Filipino time. It seems that they do not run late on purpose, but when they walk by someone they know, they do not hesitate to stop and chat with them. I also noticed a strong sense of belonging within smaller communities. For example, I thought it was really neat how the employees set out time in their day to come together to sing and pray. In America, it is nice that we are so efficient, but I think that it is important that we don't rush through our lives so much that we forget to enjoy each other. Adaptation. In this stage, a person develops some skills, very contingent on communication, in order to survive or adapt within the new culture. Basically, you start to develop communication skills and nursing skills that you have learned from the new culture. An example, I was surprised by how comfortable I was walking into their home and asking personal questions. The exercise was a good example of our differing cultures and gave me a close view of Filipino family values and how they interact. It also taught me how to formulate questions in an understandable framework for them. Integration. And most likely very few people achieve this unless they are bicultural. Bicultural means they are both fluent in the language and very personally familiar with both cultures. Very often these are people who are maybe second generation, biculturally adapted to one culture and having been raised somewhat under the influence of the native culture. In the study abroad trip, usually Kit is probably the only bicultural person in our group. The ability to live in both cultures. That means you can communicate, you can understand the social milieu in these two cultures, and you are fluent in the cultures themselves to be able to get around. Reversal shock, ambivalence. When you return to the United States, you will most likely encounter feelings of somehow a transition coming from your immersion in the culture from abroad. I've been back for a few weeks now, and I'm starting my pre-Philippines way of life. This is good in a way, but scary. I find myself complaining about petty things. So many people have asked me about the trip, but no matter how much I talk and try to explain, I can't make people feel the same way I did or understand my experiences. This cleared up things a lot because I was having a hard time explaining, because no matter what I said or how many pictures I showed, it doesn't do the experience justice.